So here are 5 business lessons that we can learn from the biblical account of Isaac digging wells and contesting with the Philistines in Gerar to emerge prosperous and victorious. So what can we learn from this account and how can we apply it in our businesses today? Let's get started. First, just as a quick backstory, we see in Genesis 26 an account of a famine in the land of the Philistines in Gerar, and Isaac prospering in the midst of that, and also going on to have to contest with the Philistines for wells so that he can guarantee the continuation of that prosperity, because their prosperity was in terms of sheep and flock and cattle, and living in a desert area, as we can see in the Middle East. They needed water at all costs, otherwise all their wealth can disappear overnight. Let's get started. The first lesson we learn from here is that we must first of all put our trust in God and not in man. God can use men to be a blessing to us, to be resources, but we must always remember in business, as in everything in our lives as believers, that God is really the source and not the man. And we see that in the very first verse in Genesis 26 says there was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. Now, we are not told exactly what Isaac went there to do, but it's quite clear that if you look at the pattern that his father Abraham did as well, was going to a king so that he can benefit from the authority and the resources that that king could have. And the reason is, immediately in verse 2, the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I'll be with you and bless you and your descendants." So this takes us immediately also to the second lesson we can learn from here, is that besides putting our trust in man instead of God, we should not also be routine animals trying to copy what worked in the past or what the people before us did. But as believers, the second lesson, we must allow ourselves to be led per time by the Spirit of God. So Isaac's automatic instincts was to go down to Egypt like his father before him did, and that's something we often do perhaps in business, in our life. We just stuck with what we think worked for the people in the past. But when we look at the account of Abraham going down to Egypt, we know very well it didn't work out for the best. True, he emerged richer, but he went there and it was one scandal after the other, with the king taking his wife thinking it's his sister and ending up having to drive him away with the gifts, of course, that he had already blessed him with. But either way, his salvation was not in Egypt. So this reminds us that 1, our salvation is not in man, and 2, we must allow ourselves to be led by God, because it's in him that our salvation lies. So as we continue with the account in Genesis 26, we go down, we see like in verse 12, in effect, Isaac dwelled in the land, and verse 12 tells us, "Then Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flock and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So the Philistines envied him." So these are the same people he went to for help and salvation, and yet God has told him, "Trust in me. Do not move. Do not seek help from elsewhere. I will bless you." And now it's the people that he thought were his salvation that are envying the prosperity that God has blessed him with. However, with that blessing comes a responsibility that he needs to provide water both for drinking and for watering these animals to protect and preserve his wealth. And that's what takes us to our third lesson, because when we go down to verse 17, we see that the wells which Abraham, Isaac's father, had dug, the Philistines had closed them up out of jealousy, and so he had to go back and start digging them back so that he can preserve the wealth and prosperity that God has given him. And our third lesson we therefore learn is that of perseverance and consistency, because he goes on digging one well after the other, and these people come and contest for the well and seize it, and he goes and digs the next one and they contest and seize it. For many believers, when we hear God direct us to go somewhere or do something, and then we have a little bit of pressure or obstacles or resistance, we just tend to think this is not of God, and so we are going to give up. We pray very dumb prayers like, "God, if you really sent me here, then let it be easy." But if it's tough, it means God didn't send me. That's a very, very dumb prayer to pray, because the resistance, the contention is part of God's process and design to make us grow, to be able to manage the wealth and the blessings and the power and the responsibility which He's entrusting unto us. Verse 19 tells us also, Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they quarreled with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, because he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. So besides the perseverance and the discipline and consistency to keep digging the wells over and over again, the fourth lesson we also learn from here is that as believers, sometimes by the leading of God, we have to fight. You have to fight and not just roll over and play dead or be a nice person. So you start a business with a partner, and then they use some manigancies and try to kick you out of the business, and your only response is, well, it's the will of God. I don't want to contend and fight for this. I'll just let it go. I hand it over into the hands of God. You can't keep doing that forever. Isaac could have said, what's the point of digging more wells when these people are only going to contend and seize it? But no, he fought and stood his ground, and that's why naming it Rehoboth is saying that after fighting, the Lord has created space for us. He has made room for us so we can prosper in the land. Therefore, sometimes when you know that you're right, you can't just play nice and let it slide. You have to be ready to fight, especially on what God has told you and where God has led you to possess. Rolling over and playing possum is not for territorial commanders. It's not for people who are called to have dominion or to occupy till Jesus returns. So don't accept every injustice because in quote you're a believer and people can take advantage of you when you're just going to roll over. No. You have to fight for the visions and the purposes which God has laid in your heart. And once you fight, He goes before you and creates room for you to also prosper in the land. And the last but not the least is to acknowledge and glorify God all the way. And that's what we can see as we go through the account of Isaac. Every victory, he acknowledged God as his source and the author after realizing that man could not be his salvation. So many times people go around thinking of themselves as self-made millionaires, or I built this company from the ground up. That is not the right frame of thinking for someone who knows that is not according to their ability or their capacity, but it's according to the capacity of God. And so they have to acknowledge and give Him credit every step of the way, that He may continue to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can think, ask, or imagine. So those are the 5 lessons we can learn from the biblical account of Isaac digging wells and prospering in the land of Gerar in the face of the Philistines. I'd like to know what you think about this in the comments below. Which of the 5 lessons strike a chord with you? Please share that in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps us. And subscribe, hit the bell if you're new to the channel. A big shout out to our patrons. Thank you so much for helping us create this content. We won't be able to do this without you. You too can support the channel. The link is down below. And but as you may see from Wisdom for Dominion, thank you so much for watching. And until the next video, stay blessed.